Jy luister na Isak Du Plessis op Nuuspot.
Morning, Isak.
Good morning, Phil.
How you doing?
I'm very well, and you?
Yes, very good, very good.
Great.
Isak, I know your audience is Afrikaans. I understand Afrikaans completely, so I won't do the interview in Afrikaans because I'll just make myself look like an idiot. But if you want to ask questions in Afrikaans or put bits of Afrikaans in there, and if you want to top and tail, that is fine. I don't mind. I will understand you completely.
No, I will try and put the questions in English. I must just warn you that I speak Free State English. So, if you can live with the Free State English, I'll try and keep to the English. But
well, I speak British Afrikaans. That's far worse.
Just be warned, the E's and R's and verbs and everything will not always be in place. But I think you will be able to understand me.
Not only that, is like the funniest thing with British people is they travel the world, and obviously English is the common language. So invariably, unless like it's easy for me because I live here, so you learn Afrikaans. But if you are traveling, what language do you learn? Because everybody uses English as so actually we completely tune out anything. So I won't even notice that. And when I got married, my wife's Afrikaans, and I asked one of my good friends to be the MC. And he's quite a shy guy in some ways. And he said to me, look, he really didn't feel very, very comfortable. And if I wasn't going to be offended, he'd rather not. So I said, no, that's fine. No problem. He phoned me a week later and he said to me, look, I've thought about it. And if the offer's still open, I'd like to be the MC. I was just really worried about speaking English in front of everybody. And I said, but Jacques, one, your English is great, but two, I promise you that there will be English people there who come over for the wedding. They won't even notice. And he said, Phil, I'm not worried about the English people. I'm worried about the Afrikaans people mocking my English.
I've learned one thing in this career of mine is that you can speak bad English, but if you do it with enough self-confidence, some people will miss it.
But funny, my children are Afrikaans speaking, and I've got two of my own, and then I've got stepchildren from my wife's first marriage. And interestingly enough, the oldest one, so I speak English with my wife, but I speak Afrikaans with my children. And one of the rules that I had for Mika Marie, so she's now 15, and she was 3 when I met her mother. And I said, look, we never spoke English to her. And the only rule I had in the house is nobody was ever allowed to correct her. Because exactly that, I said confidence in a language. I know from myself, confidence is way more important than grammar. And actually, and she eventually switched over and she does English as a first language as well as Afrikaans as a first language. She's completely fluent. We've never spoken a word of English to her, but she's never once been corrected. And when she comes home and she says, the English teacher said there's this rule, I say, Mika, just forget all the rules. You'll never remember the rules. Close your eyes, say it in your head, and trust yourself.
The man I'm talking to is Phil Craig. He's leading the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. And as you have heard, he's British. How long have you been in the country, Phil?
20 years, just shy of 20 years. I think 19 years and a bit.
Okay, so you came before Brexit.
Yeah, I came long before Brexit. I didn't vote in Brexit, ironically, because I felt it wasn't my place to vote, having left. But I watched.
so is that why you leading the Cape Independence Advocacy Group now to have your own?
Yeah. So, to go back into Europe, I think in all seriousness, the same principles underlined. So whether Brexit turns out to be right or wrong, history will tell. But actually, what you did have in the UK was a loss of sovereignty. A situation where gradually the people of the UK were having decisions forced upon them that were made in Europe that they haven't voted for. So ironically, some of those issues are much the same. Here we are in the Western Cape. The majority of voters have never once voted for an ANC government. and we are having all of these policies and decisions forced upon us, by a government we despise and which we didn't elect. So there's a lot of similarities.
Yeah, no, and the media I see has got it totally wrong here in South Africa, because according to some of the media, Capexit is white, Afrikaans, very racist, very right-wing, and here you are, a British exile.
Yeah. Of course, you don't survive very long in South African politics without being called racist. And if you've got a white skin, you don't see the day out. So I have a fairly thick skin about that. So look, I think you have to just know your own heart. And what do they say? Name was it? They say sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me.
Okay, no, I feel much better now, knowing that that Capexit is in the hands of a British exile wanting to get away from his own union. No, I'm just joking a little bit with you, Phil. Nice to talk to you, and thank you for making time for us for this conversation. But it's a serious issue. When it started out, people were scoffing at it, laughing, saying, no, this can't be serious. But this thing is getting bigger and bigger by the day. So maybe you must just explain to us what is the rationale behind it.
Well, yeah, thank you. And looking at it's like all these things. What was Gandhi's famous saying? First they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. and that has been very much our process. And I have this wonderful photo on my phone, which I keep of Nigel Farage, ironic for Brexit, and there he is, and I just love it for the caption. It's kind of inspirational because he stood with a glass of wine and a cigarette in his hand, and the caption says, 25 years ago, they all laughed at me. Well, they're not laughing now, so here we are. But we're absolutely, as you're right, deadly serious. This isn't really a joke. We've got real problems in South Africa. They aren't being fixed. So underlying all it's simply democratic. Here we are in the Western Cape. There's a bunch of people who, for 30 years, the majority of people have never once elected the ANC. So we're in this system where we never ever get the government that we want. And if there were no consequences to that, it probably wouldn't be an issue. But the government that we get that we don't want is absolutely terrible. It's corrupt, it's incompetent. We've got massive unemployment, we've got terrible crime, people are dying. We've got no economic growth. Our children are emigrating to other parts of the world because they can't see a future here. We've got real problems in this country that's absolutely beautiful and magnificent and can be saved and must be saved. And the logical thing, and I accept that we feel sorry for people outside of the Western Cape where we must find other solutions. But here in the Western Cape, our solution is simple. We must get the government we want. This system of government doesn't work. Why would we keep opting into a system and saying we'll agree to be part of this system where people outside of the Western Cape keep electing this terrible government and then agreeing to be governed by it, even though we didn't vote for it? It would be insanity. Here we are after 30 years. Tried that, been there, done that, got the T-shirt, didn't work. Let's govern ourselves. Let's elect our own government. Let's create a future in the Western Cape. And then actually let's hope that then breeds out into the rest of South Africa and helps inspire and find solutions elsewhere so that we can get rid of this terrible chapter and move forward and create a future for ourselves.
But won't it be easier to get rid of the government rather than trying to get away from the government?
Well, no. The honest answer is not in the West. So I mean, if we look at South Africa, the harsh reality is, that the government that South Africa has is the government that South Africa wants. It's not like whatever we may think of the ANC, and for me, it's something I would scrape off the bottom of my shoe. It's the freely elected government of South Africa, and we're looking forward to saying, hey, 2024 is a watershed election. It's a watershed election where even in our wildest dreams, the ANC will get double the votes of any other political party. So we have to accept that outside of, and if you take the Western Cape out of that vote, that picture is even worse. In 2019, 73.1% of voters outside of the Western Cape voted either ANC or EFF. That's the government that South Africa wants. It's not the government the Western Cape wants, and we can't, in the Western Cape, we can't vote it out. We didn't vote it in. We've never voted for it once. We can't possibly get rid of that government. And actually, this whole story of coalition governments is one almighty lie. And unfortunately, and I don't use those words easily, the people involved, they know we're going to end up with some form of ANC government after 2024. There is no possible mathematical prospect. And I've spoken to these people. I promise you, behind the scenes, they all know. But politically, you imagine if you're the DA and you're sitting here and you're thinking, right, well, look, what's actually going to happen? You've seen them. They've tried to say, look, in 2019, the DA, the ANC, and the EFF between them got 89% of the vote, and the other 45 political parties got the remaining 11. There is no mathematical possibility of a government that doesn't include at least two of those parties, unless the ANC get an outright majority. That's just a mathematical reality. The DA have tried to float this idea of saying, what about a DA-ANC government? Zilla's spoken about it, Steenhuisen's spoken about it, Hill-Lewis has spoken about it. And every time they raise this prospect of maybe working with the ANC, they get this massive backlash. And here we now, magically, we've got this coalition government being offered to us. They got the parties in the coalition got 32% of the vote last time. Not miraculously going to get 50% of the vote. They know that. But if you're sitting here as the DA now, you want people going to the polls in 2024, thinking, I hope, just maybe it can happen. I'm going to vote for the DA. I'm a bit fed up with some of these issues, but I'm going to vote for the DA because just maybe we can get this. But it's not going to happen. And at the end of that vote is not going to put the coalition government into power. I think we are likely to see coalition governments in Gauteng. We could potentially see coalition governments in KZN, and obviously, the Western Cape will stay out of ANC hands. So we are going to see changes, but those changes are going to be regional and not at a national government level.
Why the Cape?
Why the Cape? Why Cape Independence? Or why the Cape?
Yeah.
Well, the Cape is unfortunately is the only province. So there are other solutions, and actually, it might be worth having a conversation about what those could be. For example, I know your audience is predominantly Afrikaans, and I think there are solutions outside of the Western Cape for the Afrikaans community. But in the Western Cape, it really should be a no-brainer. Here we are. The South African Constitution, like it or not, has created a province. It's defined a boundary. It's appointed a parliament. The Western Cape has its own constitution. The only province that does. We've got a premier, we've got an electorate, and we don't want the ANC, and we've never wanted the ANC. So therefore, that makes a very easy decision to have. I would love to have that argument to say, well, let's go and do that in the Northern Cape. Let's go and do that in Gauteng. But you can't, because those mechanics aren't in place. The reality is every other province apart from the Western Cape elected an ANC government. And that unfortunately is the reality.
Who's going to vote? Who do you want to vote in a referendum to free the Cape?
Well, everybody. So a referendum in the Western Cape will be all registered voters. So in fact, at the moment, we're calling for a referendum to be held on Election Day 2024. We're saying to the DA, hold a referendum on Election Day 2024. Have an extra ballot. So actually, we can vote for the government, and we have an extra piece of paper that says, do we want Cape independence or not?
But what about me?
So, well, where do you live?
I live in Mpumalanga. Yeah. But at the moment, the Cape also belongs to me because I'm South African.
Sure. Well, so unfortunately, under international law, it doesn't really work that way. For example, when Scotland voted for independence, everybody who lived in Scotland, if you were English living in Scotland, you got to vote on Scottish independence. If you were Scottish living in England, you didn't. Because the reality is you are voting about that region, and it goes about the right to self-determination. And so the people of the Western Cape have got a right to self-determination to decide for themselves. And clearly, if we just allow everybody in the country to vote in that election, then it's not really self-determination. It's just determination. And we're right back to where we are now, and we have this situation where we've got 7 million people living in the Western Cape, who aren't voting for this government, and we're entitled to make choices. We can't become passengers trapped on somebody else's ship. And of course, we feel unfortunate. I feel sorry for you not being in the Western Cape, and perhaps you'll decide the Western Cape is a better place to set up a home once we've got independence. But there's not much I can do as a Western Cape voter to affect the outcome in Mpumalanga. Yeah, that's for the voters of Mpumalanga to decide.
So I know there are existing rules and regulations about this, international regulations about this, but do they really exclude me as a fellow South African to decide on the future of the Cape that I love to visit?
Well, unfortunately, they do in as much as So they do in terms of the referendum. So maybe I should put, I think, one of the critical judgments. And if people want to sort of really boil it down to a nutshell, a really great section to read is in it was in a judgment made by the Supreme Court of Canada dealing with the issue of Quebec, and it dealt with an awful lot of these issues. And actually, in that situation, Quebec was having an independence referendum. It said, well, look, at the end of this referendum, we just want, if people vote to secede, we're just going to secede. Canada said, well, it's not really that simple, and actually, it went to the Constitutional Court. And that's relevant because the issues in international law are the same on all countries, even though that judgment wouldn't be binding on South Africa. And on top of that, then Quebec or the Supreme Court invited all of the world's exports to come and deal with this issue. And it all boiled down to one paragraph. The paragraph, first of all, said, look, doesn't matter how many people vote for independence in Quebec, and for Quebec, need obviously the Western Cape. Quebec can't just declare itself independence the next day, because actually it's part of Canada and it has responsibilities elsewhere. But the same applies in the opposite. In a democratic order, Canada can't just tell Quebec it can't leave, because if the people of Quebec want to leave, it's a democracy and they're entitled to leave. Actually, in that scenario, there is no predetermined outcome in law. What we then need to have is a negotiation between the Quebec government on behalf of the people who want to leave, and the Canadian government, and then we would have to find an agreement which takes everybody's interest into heart. So clearly, the Western Cape is linked to South Africa, and South Africans, their interests are going to have to be taken into consideration in this decision. But ultimately, that can't trump the right of the Western Cape people to determine their own destiny. Actually, you used the 1910 analogy of the British, and rightly so. The British have a lot to answer for that. It hasn't served the people in this part of the world particularly well. So in the same way as people could forever be stuck in what happened in 1910, neither can they be forever stuck in an agreement that was reached in 1994. Actually, at some point in time, the people in any part of the world, and in the Western Cape included, can say, well, look, this just doesn't work for us anymore, and collectively we want to make a different plan.
So isn't this just a question of wanting to separate a well-governed province by means of a South African political party from the rest of South Africa?
So, what you mean in terms of separate the rest of I'm not quite sure. Are you meaning that the DA want to separate away?
No, I was in Cape Town this past week. I visited Nampo in Bredasdorp, and it again struck me how different the Western Cape looks from where I come from, and the towns that I drove through. You can clearly see there is so much difference in service delivery. Of course, there are mistakes, but that's not important now. But the difference, there's a vast difference in the image of each town, in the quality of the roads that you drive on, which means that the current political party in control of the Western Cape is doing a good job, but they are a South African political party. And I had an interview with Jordan Hill Lewis as well when I was there. I asked him about Capexit, and he said, "No, we're against it."
Sure. No, look, so thank you. That sort of gives you a better context. So let me sort of pack that out, and some of this does sort of then fall onto some of my personal opinions as opposed to the organisation, which is effectively a broad political church. The DA have done a good job of running the West Gate, in my opinion. And I think your experience is the experience that most fair-minded people would say. Look, the ANC have done a pretty terrible job at running the rest of the country, and comparing to that, the DA have done an exceptional job in the Western Cape, and it's tangibly different. And I think that's right, and I think the DA deserve credit for that. They haven't been perfect, but actually they've definitely done a good job, and I agree. Interesting. Now, then you have to just step back and say, well, why is that? And clearly, I don't want to in any way diminish from the DA who've done a good job. I would say to Jordan Hill-Lewis, that's great. You're entitled to your opinion. Alan Windey's entitled to his opinion, but actually, that's not a decision for Alan Windey or Jordan Hill-Lewis or anybody else to make individually. That's a decision for the Western Cape people to make. And Jordan Hill-Lewis will get one vote. I'll get a vote. Windey will get a vote, and so will everybody else, and that's our decision to make and not his. What we have to remember in the Western Cape is the DA didn't elect itself. The DA governs the Western Cape because the Western Cape people appointed them to elect it, and that's the point. So the DA can be a national party, but the rest of South Africa doesn't want to appoint the DA to govern them. The DA can say, it's like that. I want to be a national party. We want to be the national government. We can save all of South Africa. If only, from God's lips to your ears, at the end of the day, if we could save all of South Africa, we wouldn't be sitting here. I wouldn't be sitting here. But the rest of South Africa has made it very, very clear they don't want a DA government. They don't want the DA to save them. So the DA are governing the Western Cape well, and that's one half of the equation. But the DA are governing the Western Cape because the Western Cape electorate has made good choices over a period of time, and has elected the DA and has recognised they've done a pretty good job, and that's exactly the point. And now, but actually, here we have in the Western Cape, the DA control very few things in the Western Cape. They don't control economic policy, they don't control policing, they don't control transport and the rail services, they don't control taxation, they don't control the school curriculum, they don't control the borders. There's all sorts of things that in the Western Cape we would love to have our government controlling, but they don't. And in fact, the DA have been desperately asking. Here we are in the Western Cape with the highest murder rate in the world. We're dying at a rate beyond anybody else in the country. And we have the government was elected on a ticket asking for control of the police. The Western Cape government has gone to the national government and said, we want control of policing. And the national government has said, no, you're not going to have it. It doesn't matter what you want. It doesn't matter what the Western Cape people want. So the DA can do a much, much better job of governing the Western Cape if they have complete power as a national government, if that's what the people of the Western Cape want.
Talking about the people that the Cape Independence Group is comprised of, how does it look? Is it really white Afrikaans, right-wing, racist?
No, absolutely.
And with a British head?
No, there are many people who accuse me of being an MI6 spy, which I find somewhat laughable, very badly paid one, and I would like to think that probably the British intelligence services would be a little more shrewd than to put somebody in with this strong English accent. But no, look. So the reality is we're genuinely a multiracial. When we formed the CIG, our leap, so that we're run by an ExCo, an executive committee. When we first joined, we had people who represented 6 different political parties. We voted for 6 different political parties, and on our ExCo, we have got white people, we've got coloured people, we've got black people, we speak English, Afrikaans, and Xhosa. So we're really representative, and actually we're a broad church, because what we absolutely agree on is that the Western Cape people must be able to make decisions for themselves. We may disagree on what those decisions might be after the fact, and we do, but you were genuinely representative. And in terms of non-racialism, we're absolutely against non-racialism. But actually, I have to say, non-racialism must cut 2 ways. So we are really against non-racialism, people being racist towards other people and racist categorizations and so on. But we're also in a defensive way that cuts two ways. Non-racialism must protect everybody, and neither are we willing to be the victims of racism either.
How many groups are advocating for Capexit? Because it looks to me typically South African and actually typical Afrikaans. If I have a quick look when I type in Capexit, you get Capexit, Cape Independence Party, Cape Independence Advocacy Group, Capexit with an X and not with a exit. So how many different groups are there? And are they all part of your group?
Primarily, there are four organizations that are leading the fight for Cape independence, and we all work together all of the time. And so actually, this is a question we get an awful lot. People say, why don't you just work together? And I guess there are always going to be some element of if you have 7 million people, it's unlikely you're all going to agree on one particular route. So that's perhaps natural. But I prefer to use the example and say, look, if you're building a house, it doesn't help if you have 4 bricklayers and no carpenter. Or 2 electricians and no plumber. You need people to fulfill different roles. So the 4 organizations that have worked together really for a few years are ourselves, the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, and we're a political lobby group. So our primary role is not really to engage at a person-to-person level, but it's to influence the positions of political parties, to deal with the media, to produce research. So in many ways, we're kind of, let's call us the thought leaders and then the political influencers. Then we have Capexit, who are a not-for-profit organization, and they engage primarily with people on the ground. So they're collecting mandates from people, and they've got about 840,000. More than 1 in 4 Western Cape voters have signed up with Capexit saying, I want Cape independence, and they have outreach teams. So they're very much engaged at the coalface. So there's we're doing different roles. And then we have 2 political parties. We have the Cape Independence Party, quite a small party, libertarian in terms of ideology, and then we have the Freedom Front Plus, who then formally support Cape independence. So, and clearly you can see the Cape Independence Party and the Freedom Front Plus have very different mandates, very different, so they're not really competing over voters. So those 4 organisations work together on a regular basis, and we now are making this call as we speak now, calling for this referendum on election day 2024. Those 4 organisations are all jointly making that call. There's a website and people can go and sign up for that call. We're going to hand it over to Alan Windy on the 3rd of October. More than 20,000 people have signed up in the last 2 weeks. And that's called www.capereferendum.org. And that's those 4 organizations, the CIG, us, which is us, Capexit, Freedom Front Plus, the Cape Independence Party. And there are 2 other smaller ones. There's an organization called the Cape Youth Front, who's a bit of a breakaway from us, who do youth outreach, and then a group from the Swartland, who working in the colored community, called the Swartland Actie Group. And those are the 6 organizations that have jointly made that call. But we march together, we coordinate. This week I've spoken to all of those organizations this week. Yeah.
When you try to criticize the Capexit movement, it's sometimes I get the feeling that it's the same as criticizing someone's religion or his a rugby team, because people are fiery about this notion, and they attack you. What makes them so emotional about it?
Well, so I look. I hope when you engage with me, that's not my personal style. I think debate is really critical, and we should hear each other out. And actually, we only refine our own positions by debating with people who disagree with us. So, but why are people fiery about this? Because it's everything. It's their future. I mean, if you're sitting here, I'm sitting here, and I'm sure I'm representing. I've got a second family, so I say I've got a lot. My youngest is a lot Lamaki and a later Lamaki. So but But I want to see them grow up. I've got my first 2 grandchildren. I want to see them grow up. I want them to be in South Africa with me. I love this country. I don't want to find one in Australia, one in Canada, one in New Zealand. I don't want to see the people. I live in British I am, but I live in a rural Afrikaans community, and my friends are Afrikaans. I don't want to see my Afrikaans family being always put down, and I want to see these communities. And I look around, I see this wonderful history. I live in a town called Wellington. Wellington was called Waarmakersvallei. Piet Retief comes from Wellington. It was where the wagons were made for the Groot Trek, the first railway station in South Africa. First ever railway ran from Cape Town to Wellington. The place is awash with history. The buildings in Wellington are older than South Africa, way older than South Africa. We've got this beautiful history, and we're in danger. I said to people often when I talk, actually, and now I'm talking particularly to cultural groups. This Cape Independence represents everybody, but in terms of this community, your culture, the culture that I've bred into, is in danger of being wiped out in South Africa in probably the next 2 generations. Why? Because we don't have the courage to stand up and say what it is we want. We're here. This belongs to us as much as anybody else. We built this magnificent country. You can take your racism, you can take your name calling, and you can stick it where the sun doesn't shine. This is our country as much as your country. We're going to save it. We're going to protect it. We're going to build it. And if you don't like it, I really don't give a monkey's. I won't use the word. So yes, we're passionate about it, and rightly so, because this is our country, and we're going to bloody well save it.
Listen, I want to ask you another question about the future. But before I do that, do you know where that bridge over the river in Wellington comes from?
The Lady Lock Bridge.
Yes. Do you know that story?
I live in Lady Lock. It comes from West Bromwich.
Yes. And do you know how it came to be in Wellington?
No, I don't.
Apparently, a guy at the museum told me this. Apparently, there was a ship coming from there, coming to deliver this bridge. They docked into Cape Town Harbour, put the bridge on that was pre-built in pieces on ox wagon, took it to Wellington and tell them, here's your bridge. They said to them, no, it's not our bridge. They took it back with the ox wagon on the ship again. Okay, it must be Wellington in New Zealand. They took it to New Zealand. They said, no, it's not our bridge. It must be Wellington in South Africa. They brought it back, put it on the ox wagon, took it to Wellington. And the Wellington people said, but we didn't order the bridge. They said, well, it's paid for, you must take it. So they had to shorten it, apparently. It was too long. So they took off a piece of the bridge is lower down in the river if you go into Wellington. I don't know if it's the truth, but a guy at the museum told me that, and it's a beautiful story. I don't want it to be different.
Well, I can tell you what, from my own experience, if you've been there, as you drive into the bottom of Wellington, there's the old mill on the left-hand side. Yes. It's a funny brick. Now, that I went into that building to do a valuation on it, but before I was involved in politics, I worked in commercial property. And when I went in there, it had a steel frame structure, and I looked on there, and my eyes opened wide, and on the beams it said, Dormer Long, 1910 or 1901, one of the two. Now Dormer Long is a famous bridge building company. They built the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and it's based in Middlesbrough, in the northeast of England. Now Middlesbrough is my hometown, and my grandfather was Arthur Long's secretary. So now I was standing 100 years later in a building in Wellington, looking at a frame that was built by the factory halfway around the world my grandfather worked. It's amazing, that history.
Beautiful story. Beautiful story. Listen, Phil, it doesn't really help to talk about future plans when you're still in the phase where you are in, but I can't help to try and conceptualize the future of the Western Cape with the current situation as it is, being influxed by thousands and thousands and thousands of people from all over South Africa, Eastern Cape, Gauteng, and it's difficult to think although the Cape is a big province, that it will be able to handle because I think it will still be influxed as a independent country.
Well, so look, it's an interesting question, and this is one of the questions that the DA love to ask, and I always find it a slightly odd question. So in terms of right now, you're quite right. So for example, there's and the issue is not really just the migration. The scale of the migration is massive. It's the fact that most of it is illegal. It's even if people are legally entitled to come to the Western Cape, they're illegally settling land when they get here, and that's leading to all sorts of issues. And 1 million people is the Western Cape population is 7 million, and 1 million of those 7 million moved here in the last 10 years from the Eastern Cape predominantly. So it's a problem. There's no question that it's a logistical problem. I understand why people are coming, and as somebody who's migrated myself, I have huge empathy with people who migrate for a better life. I think we're all entitled to do that, but we must do it within the confines of the law. Otherwise, if we act illegally, there's a massive impact on the people who were there already because we're infringing on their rights. And so that's a bit of a problem in the Western Cape, which needs to be managed. There's no question. The reality is that an independent Western Cape will almost certainly have to close its border. How it deals with that remains to be seen. Is that problematic? Yes, it's going to be difficult. And people say, well, how are you going to defend your border? Well, I mean, that's a country across the world. We've seen immigration is a huge topic across the world, and controlling the sort of illegal flows of people is a problem for many, many countries. I just find it an odd question when we're living in South Africa, which has just announced that it's got 15 million unregistered people in South Africa. We haven't got a border for South Africa. So actually, how can a country its border has just fallen into complete disuse, then turn around and say, well, how are you going to defend your border? Well, I don't have detail of the nuts and bolts of every last detail of that plan, because that's not my decision.
I understand.
But I can say, a hell of a lot better than you're defending yours. I can tell you, I can absolutely promise that.
No, it's true. As I say, it isn't really a valid question at this time. I'm just asking it out of interest's sake. The other thing that might also not be as important now, but just that's the kind of things you will have to look out when you come to that point. Is something like gang violence, which is not a problem that arose yesterday. It is a problem that comes from even before apartheid, which is sort of genetically part of some parts of the Western Cape, and which is a very, very big problem in the Western Cape one has to think about.
It's a massive problem. Absolutely, and one of the reasons we have the worst murder rate in the world in the Western Cape is gang violence. And that takes a terrible toll on particularly the coloured communities in the Cape Flats, and absolutely people live in fear and terrible conditions, and that has to be fixed. And that there isn't going to be an easy fix to that, but we understand there are going to be two critical components at the very least, probably more than that. First of all, we have to create an economy that creates jobs and creates opportunity for people. And if we we'll have to take a holistic approach. We need an economy. We need an education system that prepares people. We need an economy that creates opportunity for people, and we need a law and order system that makes sure that the law is properly enforced. And at the moment, we haven't really got either. We've got the Western Cape education system is okay, better than the rest of the country, but still not brilliant. We've got an economy again that's outperforming the rest of South Africa, but it's still doing pretty miserably because economic policy is controlled at a national level. And we've got a police system that the Western Cape High Court recently said, look, that the Western Cape management of the Western Cape Police is infiltrated by gangs. It's corrupt. There's a court finding from the Western Cape High Court that says the Western Cape Police management team is infiltrated by gangs and is corrupt, and the national police infrastructure is corrupt. I mean, we've got Becky Chili, who was dismissed as the chief of police for impropriety. He's now the minister of police. And of the last 7 police chiefs going back to the year 2000, 6 of them have been fired for some form of dishonesty, bribery, corruption, everything under the sun. I mean, we've got our police folk is a complete joke. So we've got to fix those issues. And of course, now Cape Independence isn't a magic wand. You know, we're not going to fix everything, but it is a do-over. And frankly, it's a do-over that puts the Western Cape people in charge, as opposed to the South African people who've made much worse decisions historically than the Western Cape people since 1994.
Let's dream about a road without any complications and obstacles. How should it go from here in the ideal world?
Well, and I think it's interesting. People obviously, people who don't like Cape Independence always tries to find the bloodiest example and say, look, hang on a second, here was the Civil War. They often ignore the fact that the Civil War came first, and independence was the sort of the peaceful solution. Or the but if we can look at and perhaps I'll use one. We've talked about Brexit. Let's look at Scotland. We could have used Quebec. Let's look at Scotland. Scotland is the absolute perfect example. Here you have a country where, much like in the Western Cape, the argument in Scotland was, look, we historically don't elect the same government as the UK. We have some devolution of powers, but not enough. We want to govern ourselves. The two governments got together. They held a referendum. They allowed the Scottish people to vote. They both agreed to be bound by the outcome. And as it happened, Scotland voted to remain. Well, great. That was democracy action. That was the perfect scenario. And that's how it should go here. Now, I guess it's going to be more complex, but I think we can aim for there. And Scotland's not an isolated case. Yeah, Quebec had the same. Countries that actually split. Czechoslovakia is no longer Czechoslovakia. It's Czechia and Slovakia, and they called it the Velvet Divorce. They just decided one day they were going to split. Both countries have done well. We've got countries like Estonia with 10% growth rates, created this digital economy through successful independence, and all that's not a true independence. Even countries like Namibia, who've separated away from South Africa, without any great drama at all. So there's many examples where this just works out fine. And how does it play in our case? We hold a referendum. We decide what the Western Cape people want. The Western Cape government then gets a mandate from the Western Cape to pursue independence. It sits down and has a grown-up conversation with South Africa and says, well, how do we do this? That obviously is a wider conversation that takes everybody's interests into heart. We agree that we're going to have independence on X day, like we did with Namibia. The country split. We've all got to have friends on both sides of the border. We become trading partners. We have this history, and it's just the next chapter in our history. And if we look back at the world, a map of the world 100 years ago, it looks completely different to how it does now. And we think of independence as this unusual thing, but almost every country, at some point got independence from somebody else. The map of the world is ever changing. I would struggle to think of a country that didn't get independence at some point in time.
Okay. If you can manage to go to the polls now, what do your numbers say? What's the possibility?
We just polled recently, and 58% of people in the Western Cape said they favoured Cape independence. So we are confident that if we went to the polls today, that we'd win. I wouldn't want to put names to other people for things, but actually we've spoken to a number of independent analysts and privately that I haven't found one yet that says you're going to lose a referendum. Every single one thinks we'd win a referendum if it took place today. And I think obviously that's going to be one of the issues we've got now is there's awareness is always a challenge. But of course, but the biggest fear that most people have, people want Cape independence, but they say, you know what, it's a pipe dream. It's just not possible, without realizing that they're the reason that's making it not possible. And therefore, a referendum, just the calling of a referendum, would be really, really huge, because all of a sudden it takes this out of the theoretical domain and it lands it back into, well, here's a choice. Do you see a better future with as part of South Africa? Or do you see a better future in the Western Cape? And actually, when we polled, 68% of people in the Western Cape said they believe their lives would be fundamentally better off in an independent Western Cape. And I think they're absolutely right that it would be.
Look, it's clear that the national government and even the provincial government is not going to be in your favor. So the possibility is very big that they won't approve of such a referendum. Is there a possibility of having an independent referendum, and will it have any value?
It's not on the cards at the moment. So the look. I mean, probably a lot more has happened than people have been aware. With an awful lot of work behind the scenes, in many ways, we're coming to the end of a process now. So we're about to hand over this formal referendum demand to Alan Windey. And for context, the DA and DA leader John Steenhuisen personally promised me that he would fix the referendum legislation and that he would call a referendum that includes a question of Cape independence. And I agreed that with John Steenhuisen and Helen Zidder, and they've got a video of it happening because it was a Zoom call like this, so it exists. At this point, they're trying to avoid that fact and try to sort of have amnesia because the political circuit, it was before the 2021 elections, and the political circumstances were a bit different then, and they're hoping not that. So a referendum was promised. Now we've got the situation where we're coming to Alan Windey and saying, right, hold on a second. The DA is saying it's going to be quite likely doomsday in 2024. You promised us a referendum on Cape independence in 2021. We've just polled, and 68% of people in the Western Cape favour a referendum on Cape independence. It doesn't really matter whether you think it's a good idea or not, because it's actually your choice. Call the referendum, and you can campaign against it. We don't mind at all if the DA campaign against Cape independence, but it's not their decision to make. It's the electorate's decision to make, and we're going to say to them, look, you must call this referendum. We're going to hand over this letter to Alan Windey on the 3rd of October, and it's going to give him 7 days to say yes or no. Are you going to keep to your word? Are you going to keep your promise that you made in 2021 and call a referendum on Cape independence, or are you not? And if they don't do that, then we are going to put up a single issue party, a referendum party, and we're going to stand in the 2024 elections, and we're going to ask voters to take that decision out of the hands of the DA. We won't look to remove the DA government because they've done a great job. But what we will say to people is that we will promise never, ever, ever to vote with the DA or with the ANC or the EFF. We're going to keep the DA in power, but vote for us, and we'll make sure that you get a DA government that listens to you, as opposed to a DA government that doesn't listen to you on Cape independence. And we will try and force that issue in the 2024 elections, because one way or another, we're going to get a referendum. And I think ultimately, then that passes the responsibility back on Cape independence supporters and the people of the province, because we can put forward an idea. But if people want Cape independence and the DA are going to not give them the referendum, they're going to break their word, then it comes down to voters. And if voters then want Cape independence, they're going to have to vote for Cape independence. And that's the reality. And that puts the ball back in their court.
Well, Craig, one last question.
Sure.
What will be the name of this new country?
Well, so that, of course, isn't our decision to make. That's the decision for the Western Cape people. But we favour Cape of Good Hope. I mean, it's historical, and 2, it's so apt to the country that's lost hope. The Cape of Good Hope. Surely it was made to be that name. Certainly, that's our thing, and certainly my strong favourite. But it's not my decision to make.
Paul Craig, leader of Cape Independence Advocacy Group. Thank you very much for making time for us. Thank you for a lekker talk, man. I enjoyed talking to you, and all the best.
Thanks, Isaac. It was fantastic talking to you too, and I appreciate the opportunity to sort of share our thoughts on this important subject.
Thank you. Keep well.
Jy luister na Isak Du Plessis op Nuuspot.